It all started off with a bang. Before long, though, it started to go in strange directions. And eventually, the scandals brought the whole house of cards down. This is the story of the rise and fall of Upper Deck. And this time around, I'm doing something that's a little bit unusual. And I'm not just talking about like the better quality video. Hopefully it's better quality. We'll see if this experiment works. I'm not just talking about, the suit and stuff like that. No, I'm talking about like the way that this video is going to be advertised. So it's like this. Upper Deck's current only major sports contract, like with the league you've heard of, is with the NHL. As a result, I've decided to put this video up on my hockey channel, Hockey in Context. However, Upper Deck's story touches on all 5 of the major sports that I cover on the 5 channels, kind of like the 5 families, right? And so I've invited my 4 other sports channels to be a collaborator on this video. Hopefully this means that the stretch of the video, the reach will go out a long way, right? But maybe it won't. And you can think of this like me dancing with myself, like Billy Idol. Well, maybe not that way. Anyway, you know what I mean. Now, before we go any further, I want to call out this book. This is Card Sharks by Pete Williams. Card Sharks is the best reference book for the history of Upper Deck from the beginning up to 1994. And if you want to check out my sources, this is the best thing I can recommend for you. Okay, now that we've got all of that out of the way, let's just jump straight into this. The first thing you need to know about Upper Deck is what baseball cards were like in the 1980s. I know this is the hockey channel, right? Hockey cards in Canada were kind of similar in the 80s, but I mean, baseball cards in the United States were just, I don't know, it was different, right? The baseball card market was huge, sure, but it was also extremely susceptible to a little thing that we call counterfeiting. For example, this 1963 Pete Rose rookie card was one of the first significant counterfeits in the industry. If you compare it to this high-grade legitimate example, you will have a hard time seeing the difference. Of course, the key is to look at the back. A judge ordered that the counterfeit cards be stamped with counterfeit and original reprint back in the 1980s, but note that the cards were not ordered to be destroyed. In fact, it is common to see those original reprints sell for something like $20 on open auction. In other words, even the counterfeits have more demand than anything from the junk wax era. Well, I mean, at least there's like a good story behind the card, right? But there was a much, much more significant counterfeit card in the mid-1980s. There was one that actually had the potential to bring the whole hobby to its knees. That was the 1984 Don Mattingly Donruss rookie card. That would be this card right here. This was one of the most famous cards in the hobby for years. Donruss purposely reduced the supply of baseball cards in 1984 and 1985, which caused these sets to maintain a relatively high price, especially for the junk wax era. The 1984 set is generally more sought after than the 1985 set, and the Mattingly card, of course, is the gold at the end of the rainbow. And this is an example of the high-quality counterfeit that started to pop up around 1986 and 1987. Some of the Mattingly fakes were marked as reprint on the back, but not all of them. And most famously of all, there is this framed and mounted example that I believe was put together by a card shop. Now, this is only famous if you've actually read Card Sharks, by the way, and I have it somewhere. Actually, I have the book right here. Look at this. Here's your evidence. I actually own this book. I didn't pirate it. How about that? Anyway, the reason why this is famous is because one of the guys who wound up founding Upper Deck was visiting a baseball card shop around like 1987 when he saw that plaque. And he was puzzled because he realized for the first time that counterfeiting was actually a thing in the baseball card hobby. But then, of course, he realized that he could actually do something about it. You see, the name of that man was Paul Sumner, and he happened to have experience creating small hologram stickers. So back in the 1980s, major credit card companies used these holograms as an anti-counterfeiting technique. Sound familiar? These stickers are designed to be obviously complex and difficult to print cheaply, which means it should be easy for a merchant to see if one is fake or not. And so, for example, it might be hard for you to tell if your 1952 Mickey Mantle card is an original or a reprint unless you've got a real card to compare it with. However, your 1989 Upper Deck Ken Griffey Jr. rookie was almost impossible to illegally reprint because the printing technique used to make the hologram is prohibitively expensive. Now, the other thing that you need to understand to figure out Upper Deck is that baseball cards were really, really hot in the 1980s, especially the late 1980s. So, like I said, yeah, this is a hockey channel, right? We love Canada. Hockey cards were doing quite well in Canada in the 1980s, but baseball cards were so popular in the United States that like major media outlets were talking about baseball cards being a serious alternative to investing in a 401k. In fact, as I know from doing this research in original newspapers around the United States had columnists who were specialists in baseball card collecting. So back in 1979, the Wall Street Journal printed this article on baseball card investing. This was a move that solidified card collecting as a legitimate and mainstream investment in the eyes of the public. Before long, the Los Angeles Times was calling baseball cards as good as gold. The reason for all of this, of course, was a combination of nostalgia, baby boomers with money to spare, and irrational exuberance. Plus, of course, the cards that these people were nostalgic for legitimately were attractive cards. It's not that hard to see why somebody would be willing to spend serious money on something like this 1954 Parkhurst Busher Curry card, for example, because it looks almost like a painting. But as rare as some of these cards might be, there is a question about whether this is a wise investment. All right, guys, believe it or not, even though I look the part, I'm not a financial advisor, all right? However, my understanding is that collectibles can be a really dicey investment. You're basically betting that someone in the future is going to appreciate this thing, whatever it is. Do I have a thing here? Like something like this, 8-bit DOE controller or something like that, right? If you're collecting this, you're betting that someone in the future is going to appreciate it at least as much as you do now, and that they're going to be willing to pay as much as you did for it now, or maybe even more, right? That's a pretty big bet to make, right? I would argue that if you're going to buy stuff, it's best to buy stuff that you really care about or that you actually have to use instead of just collecting stuff to try to bet on what the future is going to be. And then if you've got something that is no longer suiting your needs, like let's say I finally get tired of this book, right? If it doesn't suit your needs anymore, then you go off and sell it and give it to somebody else and let them play with it, right? But then again, you probably don't want to trust me. I spend a lot of my money on junk wax because I love it as much now as I did when I was a kid, so don't take advice from me. Anyway, the hoopla and the excitement around baseball cards has a lot to do with the formation of Upper Deck. Now, one thing you need to understand about baseball cards in the late 1980s is that they weren't exactly the most attractive baseball cards of all time. In particular, the card backs were pretty ugly and hard to read. This 1988 Topps Tom Glavine is one of the better looking examples, believe it or not. This 1989 Topps Tom Glavine is more like the cards I remember from that era, with this kind of out-of-focus back that seems unusually dark. Now, the reason the quality of these cards was just so bad is because these companies were churning these cards out like there was no tomorrow, right? Things like quality control, Topps never had good quality control, but by the late 80s, there was no quality control at all, right? That's how we got, Billy Ripken and the famous, Rick Face card and stuff like that. See, this junk wax era, it was not just like a state of mind. It was a very, very real thing, with companies setting printing records year after year after year. Baseball cards, that was easy money, and as a result, a lot of new companies started to enter the market. For example, back in 1986, a company named something like Optographics came out with a line of baseball cards. These were called Sportflix. These were so-called Magic Motion 3D cards. They turned one picture into another picture when you held the card at the right angle. Anyway, by 1988, Optographics had changed its name and was now creating more conventional baseball cards under the name Score. Score was different because of its focus on action shots on the card fronts. And unlike the other baseball card companies, Score offered full-color backs, which is something that the hobby had not seen since the mid-1950s. So when Sumner and some of his friends decided to form Upper Deck, they decided to follow Score's lead and offer full-color backs. However, they also went a step further. They wanted the backs to look just as good as the card fronts. This is something that had never happened before. And they also wanted to make sure that the color separation on the cards looked really, really professional. This prototype card featuring Angels relief pitcher Dwayne Buis gives you an example of this color separation. The back looks as nice as the front, the card is white and glossy, and the colors really pop out. This is something that we had never seen in baseball cards before. Buis, by the way, was an early investor in Upper Deck, and his story is so complicated that it probably is going to need its own video. Anyway, these prototype cards were extremely popular when they were deliberately leaked in very early 1989. In fact, this was part of a master plan that Upper Deck had to take the card industry by storm. So you see, if you remember, like the late 80s or the very early 90s, you'll remember that most of us bought baseball cards in packs from stores. And I'm not just talking about like these days you got like your Walmart, your Target, and like GameStop or wherever you kids go these days, right? I remember seeing baseball cards in literally every possible store. This included things like fabric shops, like clothing stores. Like I remember going swimming once and like there was a stand there that was selling like popsicles because it was the summer in Utah and they had baseball cards like right next to it, right? So if you wanted, you could spend, $1 on a pack of something, Like I remember going to Disneyland in 1990. I was 6 years old and getting upset because my parents wouldn't buy me a pack of 1987 Topps at like the gift store. It was marked up, and that's probably why. I can remember going to like gas stations to buy cards and getting 50% off and stuff. Like the old model was really focused on retail. Upper Deck, however, realized that the hardcore baseball card fans focused on conventions and card shops. And so Upper Deck decided to target the big influencers in the hobby. These were the whale collectors, the guys who were setting the trend for what was going to be the next big thing. The idea was that the kids would come along if Upper Deck won over the dealers and the hardcore collectors first. Then, once Upper Deck established a lot of anticipation and demand among the hobby stores, the company would slowly move its product out to grocery stores, all with the markup, of course. And if you know anything about marketing, you know that this was a genius plan. You always want to go after the trendsetters first, right? You want to go after the influencers, right? Once you got these people on your side, everything else is sure to follow because these people tell other people, hey, you should go buy Upper Deck, right? And then they're going to go buy Upper Deck because the cool guy said that, right? Well, this did work for Upper Deck, but not only did this work for Upper Deck, this worked extremely well. It worked so well that Upper Deck was in danger of not getting the cards out on time. These original Upper Deck boxes were a hot item in 1989, and they were almost impossible to find when the season started. You see, Upper Deck deliberately decided to give the first batches of boxes out to stores and dealers that it had a relationship with, knowing that it could rely on hobby publications and general baseball card hype to give it free advertising. And the baseball card and mainstream media all obliged. They printed breathless articles about how amazing these cards were once they came out. Like I said, by 1989, the baseball card industry was seen as a legitimate big business and a surefire investment, and so newspapers all around the United States were writing about Upper Deck. So seriously, you just can't buy publicity like that. You just can't. Anyway, 1989 Upper Deck Baseball was a hit. In fact, it was such a great hit that you guys are still buying this stuff today. Even if you know about the scandals, you're still buying it. This Dale Murphy reverse negative card is one of the most famous early Upper Deck errors. This goes for a cool 3 figures in nice condition today, and this PSA 7, by the way, is likely a misgrade. This Gary Sheffield card is an error, though you have to look closely to see it. So you see it up here, the shortstop abbreviation is upside down. But no Upper Deck card is as famous as card number 1. This is the infamous Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card. So back in the mid and late 1980s, everybody thought that the card of the 80s was going to be that Jose Canseco 1986 Donruss rookie card, right? No, we were wrong about that. The most iconic card from the 80s, even including the Rickey Henderson rookie from 1980, the most iconic baseball card from the 80s is the 1989 Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card. That is the one that marked the end of the old era of baseball cards and sports cards in general and our jump into this new world. But there's one major problem with that Griffey. There's a lot more of these cards out there than you guys think. Card Sharks includes claims that Upper Deck senior management deliberately printed extra copies of the Griffey card and other rare cards and sold them straight to card shops out the back door. This out-of-date Net54 Baseball Forum post estimates that there were over 1 million copies of every single 1989 Upper Deck card ever printed. The truth, of course, is that it doesn't really matter if a couple extra 1,000 copies were sold out of the back door when the official print run was like over 1 million per card. Here are the PSA population numbers for that Griffey number 1, and note that the less common grades sell for a lot of money since you've got people out there who want like one card at every possible grade. Yeah, grading was a mistake. That's yet another video for yet another time. Anyway, I don't have much proof on the speculation about reprinting cards other than this book, right? Pete Williams' good old book right here, right? I will say that there are rumors that I find credible that 1989 Upper Deck Baseball stayed in print for something like 5 years. I think it's in this book, or maybe I read it online somewhere. I can't remember. However, the next big Upper Deck scandal completely dwarfed 1989 Upper Deck in importance and impact, even though most of you guys haven't heard about this scandal. Upper Deck's 1990 baseball card set is worthless, but the cards are just gorgeous. But the important thing is that Upper Deck's presence in the baseball card industry was steady by 1990. In fact, Upper Deck was so well established in the baseball card market that the company was able to start experimenting with other sports pretty much right away. And that's where Upper Deck's 1990 hockey set came from. So Upper Deck burst out into the hockey card market like it was some sort of like manna from heaven, right? You see, hockey cards had basically belonged to OPC for decades. OPC, of course, was working hand in hand with Topps. You need to understand that OPC and Topps were still two separate companies. You can check out my video on this channel about the history of OPC, for details on that, right? But the thing is that neither company could come even close to the quality that Upper Deck put out right from the start. I'll be honest, OPC's card sets were looking worse and worse as the 1980s wore on. The 1990 set was not exactly inspiring, and the card backs had this strange turquoise color, plus they looked really boring. In contrast, Upper Deck's cards had this epic quality about them, and the backs looked absolutely superb. And then there was the infamous French set. So I made a video a couple months ago about this scandal. Some of you have watched it, most of you haven't, doesn't matter. But it is worth repeating. And so as you guys know, first of all, if you make a product for Canada of any type, you have to have it in either like both English and French, or you got to make like the English version and the French version, right? OPC always just stuck English and French together on the cards. This goes back to like the 60s or something like that. Upper Deck, however, decided to go with one set in English and then a parallel set in French. Upper Deck's problem, however, is that it was an Anglophone company trying to sell a product to the Francophone French population of Canada. To this day, there are tons of these low-series French hockey boxes out there, and there just wasn't any demand for packs like this. Now, back in those days, Upper Deck had a really simple strategy. It was going to make 2 series for each of its sets, right? One was the low series, which is really what the actual set was, and then there was a smaller high series, which was the equivalent of like the traded set that you would see from other companies. Now, Upper Deck was having problems selling the French hockey low series, right? Because nobody in Quebec wanted it. Remember, this is before the 94 referendum, and people were getting really, emotional about this, and we got to break off from Canada and all this stuff. And so as a result of this and the low sales, Upper Deck very publicly, kind of secretly publicly, decided to make only like 600 cases of these cards. And when the hobby found out about this, this caused an absolute frenzy. This information leaked out, supposedly by accident, causing the value of a case like this to go sky high on the secondary market. People treated this like it was some sort of insider trading tip, ignoring the obvious fact that everybody in the sport card collecting industry just so happened to know the same supposed insider information. Meanwhile, Upper Deck had additional cases of the product printed in secret, much of which was distributed directly to company executives, who then sold it directly to dealers. The prices eventually crashed, and now there are tons of these Upper Deck high series boxes out there on the open market. And if you're curious about like what happened, a lot of these profits, at least supposedly, went straight to upper decks like higher level management. Now, I don't have any proof beside what is written in this book. And like, who knows? Nobody's made like the sequel to this book. Nobody's come out and said, Pete Williams, you're totally wrong or anything like that. But my understanding is that to those who are insiders in the industry and those who are serious collectors, this story is actually pretty well known. And I believe it, especially since Upper Deck kept on doing sketchy things after this. The thing is that Upper Deck's cards just looked tremendous as the years went by. Upper Deck created some of the most iconic cards in the history of the industry, and it got to the point where the company was basically making a different class of sports cards than anybody else. When Upper Deck started making basketball cards in 1992, it basically obliterated all the competition right away. No matter what the sport was, Upper Deck's cards always stood out from the competition. And this included a serious set of cards for the 1994 World Cup, marking Upper Deck's first expansion to Europe. So you have to understand that by 1994, soccer cards were basically dead in England and in most of Europe. Companies like the old A and BC had gone out of business like decades before. Topps had some cards for a while in the 70s. They didn't sell that well. And what was left of the industry was dominated by Panini's sticker albums. Those came out in the US and in Canada too, like their hockey sticker albums. There's baseball stuff and other sports. But man, you talk about those World Cup sticker albums, that was big in Europe and in South America, right? That was huge. And, anyway, in other words, for Upper Deck to try to go into this market was pretty brave. The cards looked nice, that's for sure, but there wasn't much demand in the United States for these, and there was even less demand abroad. Sealed boxes these days are kind of expensive, especially in languages like Japanese. By and large, though, Upper Deck's first experiment with soccer cards is seen mostly as a failure. Now, the other thing that we've got to talk about here is how all of these like serialized cards and ultra rare cards and all this crap came about, right? And the thing is, the concept behind this is not actually an Upper Deck innovation. The company just decided to make it official and transparent instead of pretending that all cards are created equal. Of course, artificially scarce cards existed long before Upper Deck came around. For example, back in 1933, the Goudy Gum Company didn't print card number 106 for whatever reason. Collectors who wrote in to complain that there was no card number 106 received this card for a long-retired player instead. The funny thing is that this card was clearly not a 1933 Goudy card. Instead, its general style looked a lot like 1934 Goudy, and it's pretty clear that this card wasn't printed until the 1934 cards had already been released. And so this artificially scarce card has become one of the legends of the baseball card collecting world. And, it's not alone, right? There were actually several pre-war hockey card sets that featured cards that were deliberately short printed, right? So back in those days with some of these sets in like the 20s, you could get a free pair of ice skates if you collected every single card for the full set and like sent it into the company. And so because the company wanted kids to keep buying like chocolate bars or whatever, there was always that one card that they couldn't get because there was only like 6 copies of it out there or something like that. It was just like, that scam that McDonald's had with the Monopoly game a couple years back. Anyway, Upper Deck decided to do the same thing starting in 1990. So you got this Reggie Jackson baseball subset, it's pretty common. However, there were extremely rare versions of the same cards out there that featured a second Reggie Jackson signature. Now, the best known versions of this subset include cards hand-numbered out of 2,500. This is one of the first examples of serialized sports cards that we ever saw. And as you guys know, that trend got out of control in a hurry, right? So the hunt for the Reggies was so popular that 1990 Upper Deck Baseball was a smash hit, and so Upper Deck decided to do the same scheme every single year for every single set, like until the end of time. Then in 1997, Upper Deck decided to start including cuts from authentic game jerseys as part of certain extremely rare cards. Naturally, these are extremely rare, and these kinds of cards started to take attention away from the base sets. And the more famous the player is, the more likely it is that the card is still worth something today. Now, if all of that wasn't enough, he also had the Upper Deck Century Legends line that started in 1999 with Hall of Fame signatures. Upper Deck started the process of cutting up historic documents to obtain the signatures of famous players, which it would sell as an extremely limited edition card. And so instead of like getting a Babe Ruth autographed baseball, you can now get a baseball card with a fragment of a Babe Ruth autographed baseball on it. So I guess that's progress, right? I mean, I don't know. Have you ever seen The Sandlot, right? Imagine that he doesn't have the Babe Ruth signed baseball. Instead, he's got like this Upper Deck card and they can like play Frisbee with it. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, this is a trend that totally sucks and it's been ruining the hobby for decades now, and it's also ruining the memory of the sport. And we all have Upper Deck to thank for it. Thank you, Upper Deck. And also thank you to all of Upper Deck's competitors that decided to follow blindly. The game of Follow the Leader got really crazy in 2003 when Upper Deck came out with its exquisite collection series of cards. This was a collection of cards that was extremely limited. Basically, every single card was a parallel, and you had your patches and whatever. By this time, there were so many cards and variations of cards out there that it was really getting hard to tell these apart. And yeah, this ultra rare LeBron James rookie card is kind of cool, but it feels just strange. I mean, a box of these went for $500 back in the day, and they're so rare now you can't even find them. In fact, if you just want the empty box, it's going to cost you $100. Now, collectors really should have known that something fishy was going on here. I mean, look, card collecting has always been like a lottery of sorts, but charging like insane amounts of money for a product that you've artificially limited for unclear reasons other than just me liking money, right? That feels like cheating. And this trend, unfortunately, has never gone away. For example, there was like Upper Deck's The Cup set. So back in 2023, it went for like $1,000 a tin right from the start. Topps created its Dynasty set starting sometime around 2014. You're guaranteed to get a one-of-one card in your Dynasty pack, which goes for thousands of dollars, but you better hope that one-of-one is a good player. But the most ridiculous of all has got to be Topps Transcendent. These things are basically a briefcase of cards, and it sells for like $20,000 each. In my opinion, these cards look like garbage. Any demand that exists is almost certainly due to the artificial scarcity. Personally, I think that this is an absolute shame for the hobby, regardless of the sport. So what you gotta understand here is that this does depress the market for normal cards. Let me explain to you how this works, at least as I understand this. So if you've got like a normal set of cards, without any of the stupid inserts and that garbage, the price of the cards will reflect the MSRP plus the demand that exists for the set and for each card. So if there's a ton of demand for this set, so much that like you're making big money off of just opening packs and selling individual cards, then people will open packs and sell off the cards to collect that money. If that happens, of course, the company will print more cards because it sees that there's still demand out there that's not being met, and in theory, things will stabilize until the set goes out of print. And then when the set goes out of print, it's anybody's guess as to what's going to happen, right? This is the way, at least that the card industry traditionally has worked. So you get something like, 1979 OPC hockey, right? That had a lot more demand over the years because it's got the Gretzky rookie card in it that like people pay insane amounts of money for, even though it's technically junk wax hockey junk, right? Meanwhile, if you have a set like 1990 OPC Premier, you can get it for like nothing today, right? Because collectors are just not that interested in the set, and there's a ton of it out there, right? I don't know, maybe it's going to change in the future, though it's kind of doubtful. Like I said, don't collect cards because you think that it's going to go up in price, collect it because you like it. But all of this changes when you start printing things that are artificially scarce and you start putting in limited edition serialized cards and all that junk. So when you start adding in artificially scarce cards and advertising them, people start buying more packs hoping for that jackpot. No matter how nice your base set looks, the price will always be depressed since there will be tons of base set product out there as people go chasing the dragon. So, when you start screwing around by inserting these ultra rare products in random packs to try to increase the desire people have to buy your set, you basically make the base cards worthless. And if you've got hundreds of thousands of rare patch cards and other ridiculous stuff out there, it gets to the point where people don't even know what to collect anymore. The effects that this has had on sports cards has been a de-emphasizing of the base sets to the point where these cards look horrible compared to what we had 30 years ago. Upper Deck's hockey products today are basically indistinguishable from Fanatics. It's all computer and AI generated anyway. Meanwhile, all the attention is paid on these extremely rare fancy bling cards, many of which honestly look really like garbage. The result is set after set full of low effort and low quality cards and absolutely bizarre limited edition inserts. This is precisely what happened with Magic the Gathering as well. So shout out to Rudy at Alpha Investments here on YouTube. Some people will be upset to hear his name. I used to watch him all the time. I haven't watched him for years now, but I know he's controversial, right? But he called all of this out a couple years back, and it has happened exactly the way that he predicted it would, right? You see, the problem with all of this is that all of the focus is turned away from what originally made these cards desirable and collectible. Instead, it has turned towards these companies trying to milk customers for every single cent that they have. And since I'm talking about TCGs, let me tell you about the biggest scandal in Upper Deck's history. Okay, so back when I was still in high school, Upper Deck made an agreement with Konami to sell Yu-Gi-Oh cards. The Yu-Gi-Oh anime first aired in North America in late 2001. The card game followed soon afterwards in 2002. And my understanding is that Konami made a contract with Upper Deck for the creation and distribution of these cards right from the beginning. And it makes sense, right? I mean, I don't know how Konami handled the distribution of cards in Japan. So Yu-Gi-Oh the card game started in Japan in like 1999, right? Like they must have had somebody they were working with because it wasn't Upper Deck back then. But they did need to have a good distribution system here in North America, right? If you know about the history of Magic the Gathering, they decided to do it on their own from the beginning, and it was a total mess for like 2 years until they got control of it, right? Well, Konami didn't want to do that, Japanese company, right, really conservative, and so instead they decided to go for the most famous card company in all of North America, which was Upper Deck. Anyway, according to extensive reporting and court documents, Upper Deck decided to make counterfeit versions of the rarest Yu-Gi-Oh cards in China. Apparently, the way to tell a fake from the real one is to look at that holograph on the bottom right of the card, which is ironic since that holograph is what put Upper Deck on the map to begin with. And before you ask, yes, there are people out there who collect these counterfeits. Anyway, in the end, Konami prevailed in court, and Yu-Gi-Oh cards are now exclusively sold by Konami. And Konami also started this replacement program for counterfeit cards. You can tell them by the K in the serial number. Anyway, I hope I got that right, guys. I'm not an expert in Yu-Gi-Oh! I've never played the game. My younger brothers used to play it when it first came out. There's so many variations of these cards out there that I honestly get confused. Anyway, the reason that I mention all of this is because it makes me believe that Upper Deck was probably up to those shenanigans in the early 1990s because they did it again. And I mean, this seems to be like an integral part of its corporate culture. But it's not just that, right? It also just so happens that the Yu-Gi-Oh incident was the beginning of the end of Upper Deck. So Topps sued Upper Deck back in 2009, claiming that Upper Deck made copies of designs that Topps and OPC had originally used in the 1960s and 70s. The problem came from inserts in the 2009 Upper Deck baseball set, which looked a lot like earlier Topps designs. In fact, you can see the similarities right away. Of course, part of the problem is that the Upper Deck literally advertised this as an OPC insert set. You can see it right here on the back. Now, as I understand this has something to do with the fact that Upper Deck had acquired the OPC brand name, and there was this idea that in doing so, Upper Deck had acquired like the OPC past or something. And Upper Deck also came out with these preview insert cards for the next year, which also looked suspiciously like the 1977 Topps baseball set. It might also have been that Upper Deck made one too many insert sets and was running out of ideas. There was also an argument that Upper Deck had taken signatures from older Topps cards for its stupid cut signature set, leaving in clear evidence that the signatures were from Topps cards. Anyway, those cards are so freaking rare that I can't find any examples of the problematic cards to show you. Now, the funny thing about this, well, funny if you're looking at it from this perspective, not so funny if, you work for Topps. The funny thing about this is that Upper Deck had actually violated Topps' intellectual property in the past. And I guess that Topps didn't do anything about it probably because there were so many stupid sets coming out all the time that they didn't have the time to check. So for example, 2002 Upper Deck Vintage looks exactly like 1971 Topps Baseball. Even the backs look the same. This is like a Topps Heritage set. Meanwhile, 2003 Upper Deck Vintage looks exactly like 1965 Topps Baseball. Again, my guess is that Topps likely missed this because there was so much stupid product that was coming out every year from all these companies. What is clear though is that Upper Deck has never really been about following like the rules. Now, not only did Topps win the court battle, which is one thing, but Topps also won the war, right? It wasn't just this little fight over here that they won the big fight, right? Major League Baseball decided to grant Topps an exclusive long-term license starting with the 2010 season. Topps has had this license up until today. Remember, Fanatics bought the license from Topps and then bought Topps, right? So it still is Topps. And Upper Deck, even after all of that, still engaged in more shenanigans. 2010 Upper Deck Baseball did not have an MLB logo anywhere. Now, Upper Deck was able to keep its contract with the Players Association, which is the only reason the set even exists. And Upper Deck kind of, sort of, maybe tried to airbrush out the MLB logos. Honestly, though, it didn't really try all that hard. And so Major League Baseball sued Upper Deck, and Major League Baseball won in court. Now, at the same time that this massive disaster was happening, Upper Deck was losing all of its contracts with the other major sports. Again, remember, this all happened at the same time. 2009 Upper Deck was the company's last basketball set. The NBA gave Panini an exclusive contract starting in 2010, and Upper Deck didn't even try to come out with basketball cards that year. 2009 was also Upper Deck's final football set. The NFL didn't give any exclusive license away in 2010, it's just that Upper Deck couldn't come to terms with the league for some reason. And just like that, all of the major intellectual properties were gone. So these days, Upper Deck makes cards for the NHL, which is the one league that stuck around. And then there's a bunch of like lower level leagues in various sports, or I don't know, like WNBA or something. I don't even know, right? Like, where do I look this up? It's sort of like Upper Deck has turned into what TCMA was for minor league baseball in the 70s and the 80s. Anyway, this fell apart so quickly that I don't think most people really realized what was happening at the time. And in hindsight, nobody's really like gone back to pick up the pieces. But of course, the influence of Upper Deck is still felt today. So I mean, Upper Deck over the years did make its presence felt even in soccer when it came out with this Manchester United set back in 2003. So this is where your famous Ronaldo rookie card comes from. Upper Deck was kind enough to insert those game-worn patch cards, which are unfortunately now a staple in the soccer card market. And this baby is probably the most desired Ronaldo card of all time. I mean, Upper Deck's not in the soccer card business anymore. Well, not at that level, at least. Like, they do, like, not even MLS, if I understand right, is something, like, lower than that here. Anyway, but the influence is still felt today on that market. Now, personally, I consider the whole thing to be just a travesty, right? So, first of all, Upper Deck could have, like, saved the company by, you know, following the law, following rules, right? You're talking bricks and minifigs, right? Bricks and minifigs has got nothing on Upper Deck, man. Now, the second thing that Upper Deck could have done is, you know, not destroy the hobby. I mean, making like a million parallels and stupid inserts and whatever, it just has taken all the fun out of collecting. Everything that is wrong about the hobby today, and I mean everything, is because of Upper Deck. But I've got to say this, the old Upper Deck cards are just simply breathtaking to this day. So since this is a hockey channel, I'm going to end this focusing on hockey cards, right? If you look at something like the 1991 Upper Deck base set, you'll see right away just how fantastic these cards look. Upper Deck's cards in the early 1990s were like a miracle. It was clear that the hobby would never be the same again. But sets like the modern Upper Deck Premier set, they super suck, even if they're supposed to be rare or serial numbered or whatever. I mean, these stupid cards weren't even ready for sale until the next season had already begun, which means everything's way out of date right from the beginning. The base set doesn't have anything like the feel of the classic 1990s sets. And the backs, my favorite parts of the cards, these backs just suck. And that goes for all of Upper Deck's modern products, by the way. So once the greed machine got rolling, the company just couldn't help itself, right? Anyway, Upper Deck, it's a mixed bag. The best card sets of the early 1990s, I'm talking Stadium Club, I'm talking Fleer Ultra, I'm talking all those premium sets. Those sets only came around because of Upper Deck. But as soon as the companies realized that they could treat all of these cards like a lottery, all of the innovation and all of the good stuff just went out the window. Now, I wish we could have the old Upper Deck back, but I also wish that we could figure out a way to just ban all of the inserts and lottery cards for good.